One of the things we always do at the start of the show, we talk about how you got your start in video production. The way that I usually like to phrase it as, whenever I'm listening to an interview with like a director or an editor or somebody, they always say, "Oh yeah, well, I was interested in making things like going out with a family camera in the backyard and shooting stuff with friends, but there was like one movie or one show or this one moment where it all fell together and I just decided that this is what I wanted to do." So do you have a moment like that, or how did you get your start in video?
I think for me it was kind of like a slow realization. I think, I think the rise of YouTube is kind of what did it for me. Like, I remember growing up and YouTube was starting to become a thing, and like in middle school people would be like, "Oh, did you see, How to Be Ninja" or whatever. It was like the first like viral video I remember seeing.
Right.
And like, so that was first of like, oh, it'd be cool to like make, stupid videos and put them up. I never did, but like in the back of my head it was there. And then the one movie was actually one more recent. It was The Social Network, which was like, that was what like flipped the switch on my mind. I was like, oh, you can really like just make a movie about people. Like, it doesn't need to be like a huge, fantasy epic. It could just be about people, and it's good. And then that was sort of got my brain going of like, maybe I should start like writing some stuff and like just see what happens. And that's where it kicked off really for me.
That's interesting. Yeah, the Social Network. That's not one that I haven't seen in a while, but that's a great. I can see where the inspiration came from. That is a very like people centric movie. That I think that's one thing I really like about that.
Yeah, and I feel like, growing up, you usually, I love Star Wars, I love the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, but it's like when you're watching those movies, in your head, it's like, oh, that's unachievable, right?
Yeah,
like,
there's like an accessibility to it.
Exactly, but then, when you start watching movies or shows that are, more low-key and more relationship and like people's emotions based in that realm, it's like, oh, wow, like this is I could do something like this. Obviously, not the next Fincher or anything, but it's possible to do something in that vein.
Exactly, yeah. So I guess then did you make the leap onto YouTube, or was it just kind of a lot of writing and honing your craft there?
It was just a lot of writing. Like here and there I did YouTube videos of like, vlogging when I used to race bikes and stuff, and like just small things here and there. But really I didn't make anything until I transferred to Kutztown in my sophomore year. That was when I actually like really started video stuff. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm still new to everything. Like when you talk a few of like decades of experience.
Right.
But yeah, going to Kutztown was what actually, because my freshman year I went to Temple and I just went for like generic communications, didn't know what I wanted to do or anything. And then I was looking at like the Kutztown majors list and I was like, oh, I forget what it was called at that point. It was called something.
The electronic media.
Yeah, that. And I was like, that sounds at least interesting. Like I'll take a couple classes and see what happened. And then my first class I had was 9 a.m. screenwriting. And like that class, I was like, holy shit, like I like doing this. That was like really like the big light bulb went off.
Right. Was that one of Johnson's classes?
Yeah, that was one of Johnson's classes, and that was like, I was like, okay, like this is possible to write stuff that it's interesting and compelling. And oh man, that like changed my life basically.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with getting a quote unquote late start. I guess we all gotta fall into our place somewhere. So I guess so. The you say the Kutztown experience is kind of like what really made you decide like that. Yeah, no, this is definitely what I want to do. But so you ended up falling into this role you have with Liberty Camera Co. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm sure your listeners know at this point, our senior year at Kutztown, we had to do an internship. And there's like a giant list of places to choose from. And I was scrolling through, and a lot of it, it was news, it was live events, it was sports, like, interesting, compelling things, but just not what I was looking for. And then later that one day I was looking, Josh posted a picture on Instagram of Liberty Camera, and he was like playing with some like, $1,000 camera, and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. And so I reached out to him, we talked about it, and I was like, even if I end up not being super interested in like this tech camera side of things, at least it's something interesting for a couple months. I would hate to have something where it's like I'm doing something boring for weeks on end. So like having the opportunity to do something that was really interesting it was great. So, I applied, went down for an interview, hit it off with them really well. And the internship was like a huge, like, oh my God, there's so much to learn in this realm. It was insane.
So had you didn't really like know know much about like cameras and stuff going into it, or was that kind of like?
Oh, I had like, even now, I'm not like a camera nerd kind of guy. Like I find them fascinating, but I'm still learning them. But yeah, at the time I was like, and I told him during the interview, I was like, I have no experience with this stuff whatsoever, but I'm more than willing to, like, you tell me everything, I'll just sit here and absorb as much as I possibly can.
That's a hell of an interview strategy to just say, look, I have no idea what I'm doing, but
the
please
best part
teach
of the
me.
interview was when I went there, it wasn't even like a sit-down interview. It was just like walk around the shop and talk about stuff for like 40 minutes, and then it's like, oh, we'll give you an email in a few weeks. Like, it was very low-key, very casual, and it was more of a, especially as an intern, it's like more how do you fit into the I guess vibe is the word I'm looking for, even though it sounds very unprofessional, but like sort of the atmosphere of the shop and like what we're looking for and how we're trying to present ourselves.
Right. So I guess what does Liberty Camera Co. Do?
So what we are, we're a rental house in Philly, and a lot of rental houses are one-stop shops. So you can go, you get your camera, your lighting, your grip, your props. Sometimes like everything you need is under one house. Mm-hmm. What we do is more specialized, where it's only cameras and lenses. So if you need lighting, like you go next door to our friends at Federal Grip, but for us, we're just very specific in cameras and lenses, and we try to be experts in that realm.
Gotcha. So you like run out to like what kind of scale productions? Like a little bit of everything, or is it more like
a little bit of everything? It depends what's happening. Like, before this whole pandemic thing happened, we had a bunch of stuff on was going to be a shoot for a streaming service. I don't want to get too specific just in case I don't know the legal terms of these things, but first the streaming service, they were going to do an ad, so we had stuff on that. Commercials that come into town, we usually do stuff on, but there'll be things like, small 2-person shoots, kind of doc style. We'll do stuff for that. Philly's interesting in that there's a wide range of productions. It's not just big blockbusters or shows or just tiny things. It's like, it depends on the month, really. At one point, the show Dispatches from Elsewhere was shooting. The new HBO show was shooting.
Right. I think Josh even worked on. I think he mentioned that he worked on the Dispatches from Elsewhere. He might have.
Yeah, that was a big thing. This summer was like a huge deal. They brought a bunch of equipment. We had some extra stuff on there. I got to meet the DP of the first episode, who also did photography for Chernobyl, that show.
Oh, wow.
Very, very nice guy. Very Swedish. Heavy accent. Great guy, though. But yeah, we basically try to cover all our bases, and we pride ourselves on being, if you want something very specific, if you want like this old lens that no one's touched in 15 years, like we'll do what we can to find it for you.
That's really cool. Yeah, I don't have much experience with renting equipment, but I have heard a lot of really good things about you guys, and it's kind of cool that you have that wider range of like, we'll work with the same people who are putting on like Dispatches from Elsewhere and Chernobyl, and also these like tiny 2-person like docu-series type things.
Yeah, and we're hoping that the only issue with Philly as sort of like a production hub is that we're so close to New York.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's just that's something that we're always going to struggle with in terms of trying to get productions to come down here instead of being in New York City. Mm-hmm. But hopefully we've had with M. Night shooting all stuff in Philly all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
And with these shows coming in, hoping that like the film office keeps pushing and keeps trying to grow and get more and more big things here, because as the big things come, the small shoots come, more jobs for everyone and more opportunities for all of us. So fingers are crossed that keeps happening.
Exactly. Yeah, fingers crossed. You kind of touched on it a little bit with like you weren't sure about the legalities, but are there any like cool projects that you've been involved with through Liberty Camera Co. that you can talk about? Or
yeah, Dispatches from Elsewhere is the biggest thing I've been a part of recently. That was pretty exciting. Let's see, before that, the Servant show on Apple TV, M. Night show. We did stuff with that. Trying to think of what else. I think those are only big things since I've been there. But before me, I mean, they helped on both of the Creed movies. We also work with this one guy, this DP, Ben Bloodwell, who was one of the 2 DPs for this show. I think it's called We're Here. It's a new docuseries on HBO about drag queens like traveling country, kind of like a Queer Eye thing happening with it.
Right.
So we work with him a lot. Yeah, I think dispatches is the biggest thing. I mean, when they were checking out, like going through their equipment stuff, there's 5 cameras, like 20 cases of lenses, just tons and tons of equipment there for like a week and a half they were putting together. It was insane.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like a very fun and engaging environment to be a part of every day. How has the pandemic kind of affected that? Is it just kind of like everything slowed down?
Nothing's really happening for anyone. You know, it's, you know, there's only so many shoots happening. It was funny because when we had to shut down is usually a time it starts picking up in terms of the jobs coming in.
Right.
So it was funny. There was actually a shoot that checked out the day before, like the shutdown, and it was like a big one. And I was like, we did everything. We got everything. We sub-rented a bunch of stuff in, and we were like, it's going to suck if like tomorrow morning they cancel and bring it all back. And the next morning they canceled the shoot, brought it all back. No. And the next day we had to shut down. And so it's been quiet. You know, there's rumblings of like people are trying to price out commercials and stuff to be ready once they can shoot. But as of right now, it's just sort of, you know, counting down the days until stuff starts happening.
Yeah, and that is kind of the unfortunate part of like being in such a huge concentrated hub is that you're going to kind of be waiting the longest, it seems like.
Yeah, and you know, it'll be interesting to see, even once we open, how fast people decide to start shooting again. Because I know out in LA, that's a big question of they may not start shooting stuff until September.
Exactly.
So it's like, are the shoots that happen around here able to be made with less people? Is there enough space in the locations? Like, that's the real question, which I don't have the answers for. So
right.
Someone smarter than me probably knows, but I'll see what happens.
Yeah, this whole situation's been really crazy for this industry in particular. I mean, like you said, it's like no one knows, even like on small scale productions, no one knows when anything's going to pick back up again or when anything's going to be finished. But I can't even imagine what it must be like for like studios and all that who have to have like this set schedule. Like if you have like your Marvel or DC where like they have to have these like specific schedules for like when they're going to release the next installment of their like shared universe, and now that whole thing has to be shifted down a year, and the hundreds of thousands of people are out of work. Yeah, it's just crazy.
And my coworker pointed out, it was like, what happens when, you know, they go back to work, and then what if your main actor like tests positive for it? You know, like you have to shut down production for X amount of time, and like, you know, you just invested all this money to start up again. Now you got to push everything back, you know, a month, 2 months maybe. Like, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I think that in the grand scheme of things, I think a lot of blockbusters are going to be pushed back, but I wonder if that's going to open the door for more sort of art house indie style stuff to have a bigger impact on like the main pop culture than it does now.
Right.
We'll have to wait and see.
I think we're definitely going to see on like the micro budget side of things, there's going to every single person and for the next few months is going to be making like pandemic, quarantine, like I survived the COVID-19, like these like little horror shorts.
There's going to be a lot of like, there's going to be a lot of, we shot this all on an iPhone only kind of shoot.
Right, iPhone only, 2 actors kind of stuck in an apartment. Like it's just, it's going to be saturated. But yeah, no, it's interesting to see how this whole thing is affecting everybody. But moving on from that, we are a movie-centric podcast, so one other thing that I always like to ask every guest when they come on is, what is your favorite movie, or movies or shows if you can't narrow it down to just one?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 movies and I'll throw in a TV show to mix it up.
Okay.
The Social Network is my number 1, always is. Second one kind of rotates depending on the day. But currently I'll say Mulholland Drive. is
Okay.
just an all-time great. I'll watch anything David Lynch makes.
That's,
And
I
then
think,
TV
also in
show
my top
wise,
10 somewhere as well.
oh, it's amazing.
Did you see that in Johnson's masterpieces for the first time, or were you familiar with that beforehand? Because that's the
I've
first
seen it
time I saw
before
it.
without realizing sort of like who it was or what it was. And I think my first impression was like, this is weird, but it's interesting. But like that was pre, understanding anything about movies beyond point, camera, and actor.
Right.
So yeah, but then watching it a second time, I was like, oh wow, like this is a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
you know.
I can't wait to recommend that one to somebody down the line. I want to find someone who hasn't seen it yet and just spring that on them. And
there's got to be someone out there who hasn't seen it. I'm hoping.
yeah, we'll hopefully we'll see down the line if that happens. But what was the TV show you said?
TV show number one for me is Mr. Robot.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
incredible series that kind of, unfortunately for a lot of people, sort of dropped off their radar after season 1, which is disappointing because like after season 2, seasons 3 and 4 were just incredible, just works of art.
Right. I've only ever seen the first, maybe, I don't want to say 2 or 3 episodes of Mr. Robot. I never finished it, but I loved what I saw. It's kind of like drenched in that like sort of Fincher vibe, you know?
Yeah, it's very Fincher. It's kind of Lynchian at points. Like there's, especially in the later seasons, there's definitely scenes and stuff when you're like, okay, what in this is reality? Like it really kind of, but it doesn't do it as like, oh, is this real or is this fake? Like it's sort of another layer of the mystery. Like you can read it as very surface level, you get really in depth into every single detail of the show, which I really appreciated for that. Like it kind of reminds me of Westworld, but in a better way. Like Westworld sort of just gets too wrapped into itself of like, oh, we're being really clever with this. Like for Mr. Robot, the cleverness is secondary to the main story.
Yeah, no, it's I'm not completely familiar with Westworld other than clips that I've seen, but yeah, I can definitely attest that anyone out there should definitely watch Mr. Robot. I know I'm a little bit of a hypocrite for not having seen the rest of the show, but I'm definitely tempted to go back now. Sorry, what was that?
Something's better than nothing. As long as you've watched a little bit of it, you can recommend it. That's
right,
I think that's the rule.
Yeah, I definitely do want to finish that at some point. It's just a matter of finding the time. And I guess I might go back and splice this in earlier, but one other thing I was going to say before we jumped onto the film discussion portion of the show was if you had any advice for people starting out trying to get into the field, whether it be doing what you do or just video production in general.
I think my main advice would be when you're looking at sort of like that first step is to not limit yourself. Like I know there's a lot of people who just sort of took the first thing they could get, or they just decided to start freelancing on their own with no real connections. And like it's definitely possible to do that and go on to be like whatever you want to be. But for me personally, I think what's helped me the most is being inserted into a world that's so connected with other departments. Like even if you can become like a PA for a bigger studio or like a bigger shoot that's happening, and you start anything that gets you in the door to meeting people that are successful in their realm of the industry. Like I know Josh talked about this when he was on of like, he met the camera assistants and he was able to be a camera PA, and like because of that he was able to get on shoots, and I was doing location scouting and stuff like that. Like the movie industry and film industry is very much a game of who you know. Yeah. Unfortunately, like for those of us like myself who aren't great at socializing sometimes, like if you can sort of force your job to be that socializing kind of thing of constantly meeting people, you have a really big advantage over everyone else.
Yeah, it is a very much a make your own luck kind of game. A little scary at times, but you're right, it definitely pays off 100%.
Oh, terrifying. And like, I'm not recommending to like just go on LinkedIn and message every single person who's like works at Marvel Studios or whatever, and be like, hey, you have a job? But like definitely like sort of work your way up and search and be like, okay, like who near me, what production company is near me? What can I do for them? And, who do they know? And like when you're on the sets, like, maybe the company they're talking to knows another company. And like, it's just about playing the game, unfortunately, for a lot of it, especially if you want, to be on the bigger sets and kind of stuff. You have to work your way up that rung. It's a different world if you're trying to do your own stuff all the time, but if you're trying to get, to be Fincher's right-hand man, you got to work your way up.
Exactly, yeah. I couldn't agree more. It is very much just like that like whole 6 degrees of separation, like trying to get as close as you can to the center, and sometimes it is just kind of doing stuff that you don't necessarily want to do for a while until the universe lines up. The one thing that I always say is I was lucky enough to kind of get hired by the place that I interned at, and there's been projects where I'm like really into it, and there's sometimes projects where I'm not really into it. But one other thing, I've been also freelancing on the side to just kind of bring in extra money and indulge in like different projects that I wouldn't normally get to do. But one other freelance pursuit that I was going after found out that I worked on this one project that wasn't really something that I was a fan of. But they were like, "Oh man, we really love that show that you worked on. We'd love to see more of that. We're totally gonna bring you on." So you never know. Like
that's great.
Yeah, those things that you're maybe not the biggest fan of could end up helping you. So I think it always helps to not limit yourself and kind of like be very broad and like be a little bit good at everything, but have a particular skill set that'll let you move on or let you open up more doors of opportunity.
If you're at least aware of what each department does, like, then you're way more likely to get even a PA job in that department. Mm-hmm. If you're aware of like what the camera PA's job consists of, you're way more likely to be able to do that when the chance arrives.
Yeah. And I think there's this huge stigma of being a PA and like not wanting to be like the person who runs and grabs the coffee all the time. But like you said, like having that little bit of knowledge about everything, like it becomes very easy to fall into a role very fast. So I think that people are like kind of turned off by the idea of like being the assistant or being the person who's like, oh yeah, no, I run around and do everything for everybody else. But that it is literally the easiest way to kind of further yourself and gain more experiences and, again, ultimately meet more people and widen that margin for error. Or not
and
widen it, but like increase your chances, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and the good thing about being an assistant or an intern somewhere is that, the pressure of the shoot isn't necessarily on you. Like, you're not the one that's having to light everything, but you're in the room and you can watch and take notes of like, how does this guy execute this lighting system? If they're doing a night shoot, like, how are they, what tools are they using? What's their technique? And the other thing is, if something goes wrong, you might know how to fix it on set. Like, there's been times where even as an intern at Liberty, they're putting camera packs together and something's not working. I'm like, well, what if you try this? And it works. And it's just like a random suggestion, and you might save the day. And worst case scenario, it's not going to get any worse. There's no pressure on you to save the day, but you could do it.
Exactly.
Which is great.
Yeah, you can. It's the perfect fly on the wall position, and it's just those opportunities, like almost literally like what you said, that arises very, very often. Like there was one instance where the place that I interned at, PBS, they primarily use Avid for all of their editing, and I forget what the issue was, but they needed to bring something into Premiere because a codec was missing or something. I don't remember what the technical problem was, but they needed to use Premiere for something, and I at the time was the only person there who kind of sort of knew their way around Premiere, so I was lucky enough to fill that task, and then that showed them like, oh, okay, he knows what he's doing and he's competent in this area, so if we need help like from him again, we know that we can rely on him. And it's building that relationship of trust. We just keep reiterating that point of like, just make sure that like as many people as possible know about you through what you're capable of doing, and make sure they know that they can rely on you.
Yeah, it's the little things too, It's the showing 15 minutes up early to every single thing, and the, always being nice and being helpful on set. The personal skills also matter, especially when you're starting out. Like, you can't prove yourself all the time. It's like, if you're at least appear friendlier than your competition, I guess, for those jobs, you're more likely to be like, oh, I like that nice kid. Let's bring them on.
Exactly, yeah.